Thank you. Hello, everybody. Having a good time? Yeah, I can't hear you. All right. Right, everybody stand up. Stand up. Right. Okay, now shake around, get moving. Like, do some press-ups, whatever. Okay, you feel better? Okay, sit down now. Right. I love doing that. Oh, we're okay. Look, we're okay. We've already done our freshening up.
I know. I've stood up so many times.
Now, everybody, I've got, as this is Web Summit, I have a fantastically sophisticated device here called an iPad, and it has Slido comments on it. So if you have the app and you want to do some questions, you can put them on Slido, and I can put some of these, put some questions to the panel. Now, who are these people? Now, Constantijn, you're with, you're promoting the Netherlands and promoting Europe as, Europe as a startup hub. Reshma, Sohoni, very famous, long-time Seedcamp accelerator, venture accelerator investor, a little bit more than an accelerator now, much more than that these days. And also now recently, you've done a big deal with Draper Esprit.
Yeah.
And then finally, Nicole from Lightspeed Ventures. So obviously, we are going to talk about whether or not you can scale up outside the Valley. And I mean, as you probably realize, there's really no point in doing startups outside Silicon Valley, is there? Just no point.
You're all supposed to boo at this point.
Supposed to go, no!
No, wrong.
So obviously there are tech companies outside the Valley, but the real question is, how do you do it? How do you scale? Because Nicole, as you probably know, you're from the UK originally, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So as you know, that when a European company wants to, enter the Silicon Valley ecosystem, sometimes they can get it wrong, can't they? And it's a kind of a big, complex, confusing space to some extent. There's a lot of, things that people aren't really aware of. How does the Valley view startups coming from Europe or vice versa?
So first of all, I'm going to start on the first thing you said about investing outside Silicon Valley and bring up a controversial point. So quite famously, Sequoia have said they not only will only invest in companies that are in Silicon Valley, they won't invest in companies that are more than a bike ride from their Menlo Park office. You quite often hear Mike Moritz say that of all the companies in the UK are only worth 5% of Facebook's market cap. And so their view is that, quite often the sort of like old Silicon Valley view is that they want to invest in Silicon Valley. So it is worth kind of being aware that there are a lot of stodgy old VCs that think that way. I definitely do not. Maybe that is to Mike's point because I am from the UK, but I think it's more because I see the huge opportunity that is outside Silicon Valley in the US and also in Europe and the rest of the world. So that's sort of, my first point on that.
But there is that kind of view, isn't there? Reshma,
Yeah.
you know the Valley, they think that way, don't you? Is it worth us trying to change that attitude, or is there no point?
I think actually these attitudes are evolving. Actually, Sequoia's broken their own rule, right? They've been investors in Skyscanner, Mapillary, and several others as well. Andreessen's been an investor in TransferWise and Improbable, and Mike Moritz yesterday became an investor in Monzo, which is London-based.
Yeah.
So I think everyone's breaking their own old school rules. So, and I think we started going to the Valley with our kind of we figured that the Valley wouldn't come to us. So about 7 years ago, we started taking a group of European companies over to the US, so New York, Boston, and the West Coast. And I can say, in that 7-year time frame, those attitudes have changed dramatically, and they do come over. And I know we see ourselves as a kind of a stopping ground in London, where you get Battery Ventures, Valor, and USV, and a bunch of these other folks coming over, doing office hours with our companies, spending a lot of time investing in our companies. IVP just led around in TransferWise. Sapphire Ventures was involved. So it's happening. I think, so the way we kind of see it is companies go to the US or elsewhere for three things: capital, talent, and customers. Increasingly, I mean, customers are where they are, obviously, but increasingly talent and capital is in greater and greater supply in Europe, particularly certain hubs like London or Berlin, increasingly Paris, Stockholm, and so forth. So I think now that you have talent there, and capital will flock to talent wherever there's opportunity. So, we're not seeing any shortage of capital from, the ground up in Europe. I know the Netherlands is making quite an effort in the LP market to get sort of LP money into the venture space as well. The German market, a lot of sort of corporates getting engaged in venture capital, and again, Asian money coming in, Middle Eastern money coming in, and U.S. money coming into Europe.
Yeah,
So.
Constantijn, you're obviously promoting the Netherlands, but Europe generally is a startup place for startups. Why do you think that Europe hasn't developed as Silicon Valley? Or do you think it's more like about different hubs, London, Amsterdam, Berlin, etc.?
Well, I think Silicon Valley is just one generation ahead. So I think in Europe, the whole internet development was kind of subdued by mobile. We had mobile phones. We had big tech was telephony, mobile, handsets, and we completely missed the space in which many startups evolved in the end of the 90s. And so a culture started. There was much more capital available, so it didn't really pick up in Europe that much. And typically, Europeans are much more tech focused, and they develop products, and they don't have that kind of market outlook and savviness that US entrepreneurs have, and that go much better with venture capital. So this kind of scaling up fast, thinking bigger, thinking outside your market, thinking global, that didn't happen, where everybody was thinking quite locally. So I think there's a cultural shift going on as well, and that's happening now. So you're seeing now that everywhere, basically, you see startup development exploding. You have a few spaces that have gone ahead of the pack. I mean, the UK has been very good. Also, especially London, it was a very strong base.
Yeah.
But also the UK government has done a lot, and I think that's interesting. A bit also looking at Israel. There are actually things you can do as a government to really boost entrepreneurship in your country through tax support or other ways. And I think we're seeing that happening at the moment. So you got a few of the front runners. You got Berlin. You got London, but now with Stockholm and Amsterdam and some of the other places coming up, and you see just the mass of entrepreneurial development, and the capital is following.
Nicole, when often TechCrunch offices in San Francisco, 5th and Brannan, I think it is, or is it Townsend? No, it's Townsend, 5th and Townsend. Don't visit. It's there's often like delegations. Europe sends delegations to an office and they wander around Google campus or something like that. Or, we get visitors in TechCrunch, and, the German government sends a delegation or something like that. Does anybody in the Valley sort of respect that, take notice of that, consider that to be useful? Or is it more of a kind of, oh dear, here comes a delegation?
So this is where I think I see the world. Pardon?
Don't be polite.
I'll be blunt.
Just give it to us straight.
This is a candid discussion between friends. So I actually see the world pretty differently to Reshma in this, because there are a lot of times where either delegates will come over, or you'll see like all of the founders from a different accelerator doing like a field trip over to Silicon Valley and coming and doing like 4 hours sitting there in the Silicon Valley VC's office. I really disagree with this. Because I think if you're a strong founder in your own right, the VC should be coming to you. They should not sit there on their thrones in Silicon Valley and just waiting for the startups to come to them. No, I think it's the VC's job to get on a plane, to go to the company we invested in the UK is Blockchain, and they were in York, and it's like, no, get on a train, get on a plane, then a train, get there, stay in the hostel, and make sure that you actually visit those companies in the towns that they are in. And so that's how I view things. There was a really exciting company
Isn't that a bit unrealistic, though? I mean, surely the VCs the one.
I think if they're so excited about a company, they chase it.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening more and more.
Is it?
So I would say 7 years ago it didn't.
Yeah.
But regularly Battery Ventures comes through, and Bessemer comes through, and any number of firms come through London, and they're meeting with our companies, 3-4 hours at a time instead of us going over there necessarily.
I see.
So it's happening.
As the connections start to form.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about relationship building, right? So whether I think you're going over there or the other way, I think this whole thing around delegations is ultimately it's the quality of your relationships. So if our companies have been funded by the great and the good, I mean, we have Kleiner, we have Andreessen, USV that have co-invested with us, then they're going to take your meetings, right? And so I think if you're going in there blind, saying I've got all of the UK there, you're not gonna get much of a welcome reception, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe some politeness, but not much more. So I think it's about the deal frequency and actually doing that work together and seeing the fruits of that.
I wanted to ask you actually. You deal with a lot with founders many of whom have, say, moved to the States or set up shop there. Do you find that it's as easy as basically sending a couple of co-founders or one of the co-founders over to SF or New York, and they set up an office and they keep the engineering team in Slovenia or Lisbon or wherever it is? Is that model working still as a good idea, or are people changing it now?
I mean, I think, is it working? Like, I think as a general statement, we've seen it work. But I think, one thing we have tolerance for is enough money that you probably get it wrong at least once, and once or, 2 or 3 times probably. And the hardest challenge is, it's a challenge on the founders. Like, you take the Codacy guys, which are well known in the Lisbon community. They're in the West Coast and in Lisbon. The challenge is on that founding team to stay really connected, and also just to make that effort of constantly flying back and forth, because your product and engineering team might be here, your customers or your main customers are over there. So do we see it work? We do, over and over again, but we've never seen it work where you just hire someone and the founders don't actually move. Yeah. So I think whether that's 1, 2, or 3 of the founders do have to, at least spend half the time each, or sometimes make a longer commitment to be there.
Now, let's just deal with some of your questions out there. There's a big vote there. Will London still be a startup hub after Brexit? I think Amsterdam's going to do quite well out of Brexit. Do you think, Constantijn?
I think Amsterdam will do very well without Brexit or with Brexit. And I think London will do very well too. And I think, so for entrepreneurs, it's maybe not even that problematic. I would assume that the startup climate in London is so rich and mature that it will actually sustain itself. We do see more investment coming in. So we're seeing funds that want to establish themselves in Europe. The default would be London, and now they're looking for other places. So they're looking at Berlin and Stockholm, and then Amsterdam becomes very attractive because of the English-speaking population. It's very international. Young people like to live there. So Amsterdam is attracting some of that. We are attracting, say, more companies that are establishing a European headquarters. Everyone who was considering London now is also considering other places on the continent. And there, some are more attractive than others. And for instance, for maybe the financial sector, Frankfurt might be more interesting, but for startups, for in medtech or more in cloud-based solutions or security, the Netherlands is interesting. So I think we are seeing, I think it's more that London is no longer the default for Europe. There are more alternatives.
So now, you've got some other options on the table, like Lisbon, of course. Do you think, does Brexit get talked about much in the States?
It gets talked about to me in the States, yeah.
Right, yeah, you're English.
But
that doesn't really figure that much, probably.
It doesn't get figured that much.
You're too busy dealing with a psycho who's president, so
exactly,
don't worry about Brexit, that's bad enough. When you see European founders coming over, generally speaking, is there any particular theme? Is it, do you see a lot of UK founders or a lot of continental Europeans?
So I guess there's a question up here on like how do we kind of source European companies, and so and that to your question, I guess because I'm British, I do get a lot of incoming companies from the UK. I used to work for a fintech startup, and so as a result, I get a lot of fintech deals. And so, but I also think like it's a VC's job to specialize in a particular space. So for me right now, I'm spending a lot of time in e-commerce and say beauty, and there's an exceptional company that's in Switzerland. And so I think she said to me, hey, I'm here building my business. If you're interested, come to me here. And so I went over there to see her. And so yes, there's a trend, I would say, around, there's a lot of interesting e-commerce companies in England, Berlin, Switzerland, a lot of great fintech companies, especially in London. Some really interesting marketplaces, and those are definitely areas that I invest in.
What they play their strengths to. Now, finally, we've got to ask this question. Surely we don't need Silicon Valley anymore because we could just go and do an ICO, easy, and raise millions of dollars on Ethereum. Do you think? It's sort of more serious question is. Does anyone think that that's going to affect how startups are funded in the future? And it means that you don't actually have to be so location dependent. They can be independent of location. You can be anywhere in the world and do an ICO now, can't you?
Well, I mean, I think a lot has been said about it. It will, first we had crowdfunding, now we have ICO, so it will take part of the funding requirements of companies. It's not particularly smart money, and it probably will force venture capital to go much more into providing services and doing business design and support to entrepreneurs. Whereas when somebody pointed out that the ICO does have a great advantage that you create a big ambassadors network or a big potential customer base already because people have invested in you.
Yeah.
So that's an advantage, but on the business creation side and the scaling side, the experience that a VC can bring cannot be brought by the ICO.
What do you think, Reshma? How do you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we're big into coexistence, and so we're huge fans of crowdfunding as well, existing alongside us. You know, I'm a big champion of democratization and the common man, right? And so I think for the common man to get into the venture space is pretty exciting, whether that's ICO or crowdfunding. But I think to the extent governance is important, and those kind of early connections into customers, help with recruiting in terms of the right talent, all of that is something, you know, venture capital does provide and a board does provide. So to the extent that remains important for, you know, people with that own ICO tokens to actually someday realize some benefit out of it, you know, I think it's a matter of coexistence.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're out of time, everyone. I hope that was useful for you. Hope you have a great day. See you later. Say thanks. Very much to
Thank you, Mike.
the panel. Okay.